Parshas Vayeshev. Yaakov finally returns after being away from his father for 36 years. And what he just experienced, we would refer to as something which was traumatic. He met his brother Esav. He believed he was going to kill him. And he sees the families of Esav. He already has established families which represent tremendous power. And he understands, there's something we can understand in concept, but we're confronted with reality. It's not simple. A person has emuni bitochon, but the test of faith or the test of fire is when you're confronted with the situation. We find that when Yosef was born, after being in Lavan's home for 14 years, he says to Lavan, I'm ready to return. Although he had no wealth at the time. Why was he ready to return? So Rashi over there cites Chazal because there's a pasuk in Ovadia, which we read in this last week's Haftorah, that Ovadia Novi himself was a ger, and he was a descendant of Edom, of Esav. He says, Beis Yaakov Eish, Beis Yosef Lahova, Ubeis Esav Lakash. The house of Yaakov is fire, the house of Yosef is a flame, and the house of Esav is straw. So Chazal say, if you have straw and you have a fire, the fire won't consume the straw unless there's something that connects the fire to the straw. What connects the fire to the straw? That's the lova, it's the flame. When the flame reaches out and is able to touch the straw, that's when the straw becomes consumed. Yosef was the lehova. He was the equivalent of the flame. So until Yosef was born, there wasn't a consideration that he would go back because he knew that he couldn't confront Esav. But once Yosef was born, Yosef's presence, Yosef's coming into existence, gave him the ability that he'd be able to deal with Esav. Now he confronts Esav, and he believed there was a chance he could be killed, not because Yosef wasn't there. He was concerned that maybe he wasn't worthy. As Rashi said, maybe he became soiled with sin. I've been diminished, all my schuyos, my merits have been diminished, and therefore I'm not worthy, and therefore I may have been soiled with sin. Therefore I'll be vulnerable to Esav. Now he's past it, but he sees what Esav accomplished. So Rashi cites the Chazal, which is a midrash. He says, how could I contend with all this? With all these families, all these princes, this power. So Rashi cites the famous moshel from the midrash. What is it analogous to? That there was this person who was a pishtoni. He was a flax salesman. And he has camels laden with pishton, with flax, and they have to go into the blacksmith shop. And because they're so overwhelmingly laden with pishton, with flax, he can't get them through the door. So there was a person there who was a little bit of a wise person, wise guy person. He says, what's the problem? One spark comes out of your bellows, it ignites the flax, you have no problem getting it in. Identically, one spark of Yaakov goes out through Yosef and it consumes Esav, you have nothing to worry about. What is he overwhelmed? He was originally going to leave Lavan after 14 years because Yosef represents Lova. It's not a problem. And now, finally, he's confronted with the issue. He's worried initially. Why is he worried? Because maybe he became soiled with sin, okay? He's not worthy. But now that he survived that, and Hashem says, you will continue, he's still worried. How am I going to contend with all these families? And therefore, that's the reason why I took juxtaposes over here. V'yeshev Yaakov eretz Meguri over eretz Canaan. If you take a look at Rashi, it's the second pshat davar acher in the parentheses. V'yeshev Yaakov hapishtoni yaseh nichlus u'gemalav tunim pishton hapachomi tomo. The blacksmith was taken aback. Oh no, yikonis kol hapishton hazeh. How could we bring all this flax into the location? The camels are overloaded. No problem. A wise person, a wise guy says, one spark comes out of your bellows, it ignites the flax, they're all consumed. He saw all these princes, all these families, which each one is represented with a prince. How could I conquer all these? Maksiv lemata elo toldos Yaakov Yosef. Ksiv v'hoye beis Yaakov eish beis Yosef lahovo beis Esav lakash. Nitzutz Yosef be Yosef shebechalev surface kulam. One spark comes out of Yosef, and they're all consumed. Brashi Yosher. But again, Yaakov knew this. If Yaakov knows this, I mean, what's he taken aback? The answer is knowing something and being confronted with something at two different levels. And therefore it has to be like reiterated and has to be restated. And you have to reflect on it. We know things conceptually, but when you go through the process of experiencing various things, you come to different levels of internalization. This over here was an internalization of Yaakov to understand, although they're all that, there's nothing to be concerned about because Yosef's representation has that value. I'll give you an example. We find one of the interpretations, Rashi cites over here, that Yosef looked exactly like his father. And that's why one of the interpretations, that's why he loved him more than all his other children. As it says, Elo toldos Yaakov Yosef. What are the chronicles of Yaakov Yosef? Ben Shmasri Shona. Hoyeros Echov Batzon. He shepherded his brothers with the sheep. He was like the chief shepherd. V'narb ebsbnei Bilo, ebsbnei Zilpa nesheoviv, and he favored the sons of the Bilam and Zilpa. They were the maidservants, the wives of his father. Yosef I'm not going to stop on this one. And he tailbeared. He brought bad information to his father. Whatever fault he could see in his brother. Yisrael loved Yosef from all his sons because he was the Ben Zekunim Alo. So there's a famous Rashi cites the three pshatim, three interpretations Ben Zekunim. He was Ben Zekunim, he was born to him in his old age, which is the literal translation. And therefore he was most favored, beloved to Yaakov, because he was born in his old age. Another interpretation is Ben Zivi Kun Domelusha Oviv, because facially speaking, he looked exactly like Yaakov, Yosef. Thirdly, the Targum says Bar Chakim Holo. He was the wisest of his sons. He had a level of wisdom, of genius, which his other sons did not compare to Yosef. So for these three reasons, that's the reason why Yosef was a favorite. So firstly, he was born, we're talking Yaakov himself is the Bechir Shabavos. He's the elder of he's the most special of the patriarchs. So because he was born to him in his old age, that's the reason he should favor him. What does one thing have to do with another? An ordinary person say, person gets older, this is what so-called his special son, because he was born to him in his old age. Yaakov Avinu, we're talking about, he fought a Malach. Of the Ovos, of the patriarch, he's the greatest, the most spiritual. He's the founding father of Klal Yisrael. So because Yosef was born to him when he was older, he was his 11th son, 11th child, therefore that's a basis to favor him. Or because facially he looked like him, that's a reason to favor him. Wise, we understand, he was the wisest, he had the greatest potential. But for the other two reasons, because facially he resembled him, and because he was born to him in his old age, why those two reasons that Yaakov should favor Yosef? Now,
Why didn't they choose? Why wasn't it articulated that it was the first child of Rachel, his favorite wife?
good question. Now, firstly, why is Yosef Lohova? It was saying that only when Yosef was born was Yaakov able to contend with Esav. Based on the pasuk in Ovadia, because fire, you can't connect fire to straw. He needed Yosef to be the flame. And Yosef being the flame means not Yosef would actually fight a battle. That he came into existence and it was Yaakov's son, that itself was sufficient that Yaakov now had the upper hand over Esav, that he's able to destroy him, to consume him. He's the flame. What does that mean? Where did the flame come from? This power to overcome Esav. The Gemara tells us in Bava Basra, Ein Zaro, this is just to support what Mark is saying, Ein Zaro shel Esav nofel, el b'yad Zaro shel Rochel. That the progeny of Esav will only fall only in the hands of the descendants of Rochel, meaning including Binyamin. And the Gemara says there's no battle in the history of Klal Yisrael which the children of Rochel were not involved in that battle. Because Rochel represents Lahova. Her sons are the Lahova because of her. Therefore, she's able to overpower. Her children have representation. They have the upper hand over Esav. Yaakov did not have that upper hand over Esav. It's only due to Rochel that they are the Zarosh Rochel. So again, it's what you're saying. We don't find there's any connection between, there's no mention because he's the son of Rochel. Or Binyamin was the son of Rochel. But factually, Rochel was the primary patriarch. And even Leah acknowledged she was the primary patriarch. Initially, Yaakov only wanted to marry her. It was only due to what Lavan had done. He had deceived him. Therefore, we have Reuven. We have the children of Leah. It's interesting. Through deception, 6 of the Shvatim came about. If Lavan wouldn't have deceived Yaakov, Leah's children wouldn't have been Shvatim. It's only due to the deception that's why it came about, which is interesting. I'd once mentioned, first of all, there's a question which we asked: if a person marries a woman and it's under false pretenses, the marriage is not a marriage. I mean, seemingly, he never intended to marry Leah. When he was under the chuppah, he believed this was Rachel. And it says only in the morning did he realize it was Leah. So immediately, what he should have done, he should have sent her off. It's under false pretenses. Halachically, it's not a valid marriage. So why did Yaakov retain Leah to be his wife? For what reason?
Because he had not spilled any seed up to that point, and it was his first seed. So he figured it was the will of Hashem that this should happen.
Baruch Hashem. Alan always his recall is accurate. So we had once said that when Yaakov gave the bracha to Reuven, who was his eldest, he says, Reishis only Reishis Kochi. He says, you're the first of my semen. He never, although he was married, he was in his 80s, when he married Rachel, this is the first of his seed. So Yaakov understood in his life, there's no such thing as accidental or incidental. That means if this is the first of his seed, Hashem wanted his first of his seed should impregnate Leah. Although that wasn't his intention, doesn't make a difference. But that's definitely the will of Hashem, because nothing in Yaakov's life happens unless it's meant to be that way. Therefore, he understood, although he believed that his choice should have been Rachel initially, but Leah definitely is part of the equation of the infrastructure of Klal Yisrael. That's what he understood, unquestionably. But he understood Rachel was the primary matriarch. She's the Akeres Habayis. She's the primary matriarch. Now, why did he see Rachel as the primary matriarch? She was. Because Yaakov understood that What is the counterbalance to Klal Yisrael? The counterbalance to Klal Yisrael is Esav. This is Esav son of Yaakov, right? Due to the brachos, when they were battling in the womb. So therefore, when he saw Rachel, he understood she is the matriarch. She will provide the children that will be the counterbalance, will have the upper hand to be able to overpower Edom, Esav. They will be the Lahava. He knew this immediately. Now, why did Rachel have that level of representation? In what way were Rachel's children, Yosef, outstanding? The Torah speaks about his beauty. The Torah speaks about Rachel's beauty. Now, why does the Torah make such an issue of the beauty of Rachel, the beauty of Yosef? The Gemara tells us in Yuma, when a person comes to before Bezdin Shomalo, and Hashem says, Lama lo kavati itim l'Torah, why don't you study Torah? So the person will say to Hashem, you endowed me with such beauty that all the women were pursuing me. You gave me a challenge which is not possible because you endowed me with such beauty. So Hashem, the Bezdin Shomalo, the heavenly court's going to say, well, you're more beautiful than Yosef HaTzadik. He had one of a kind of beauty, the history of existence. There was no man who ever had his beauty. And yet, he was Yosef HaTzadik, despite it all. That's what will be the response. So Yosef, what is his physical representation? It's the most perfect, attractive representation of physicality. And that's what Rachel was. Rachel was that. But who was Rachel? Rachel herself was worthy of being the matriarch. That means she took every aspect of the material, of the most perfect level of material, and she dedicated it solely to facilitate the spiritual. What did Esav do? He was the epitome of physicality, of power. And he went and he was consumed by the material. The material dictated his life, and that was his life. Rachel subordinated it and subjugated the material to the spiritual. That's what Rachel represented. And therefore Rachel, as a result of that, was the Lahava. She was the flame. She reached out, she took that material, and she consumed it, and she subordinated it, and she converted it to spiritual. That was Rachel. As a result of that, Yosef and her children, they have the power to overpower Edom, Esav, for that reason. That's base. Yosef is Lahava, because she's Zarasha Rachel, and therefore she could reach out, her children, and consume Esav, what Esav represents. We explained this in the past. This is the concept.
Rabbi?
One more second. So why did Yosef, it's interesting. Until now we speak about Yaakov, and in Pasuk Gimel we speak about Yisrael. The appellation for Yaakov is Yisrael. Yisrael Avos Yosef. It doesn't say Yaakov Avos Yosef. What is the name Yisrael? When did Yaakov, when did that name change take place? After he had defeated the archangel of Esav, when he had the upper hand. Yisrael represents the ability to overcome every physical challenge. And that indicates that you're the spiritual person, and therefore you are the father. You are the objective, and through you, the objective of creation will come about. That's why it's Yisrael Avos Yosef. Ki ben Zkunim although. Yisrael, because Yaakov saw Yosef as his full successor. Yosef will be the one to deal with all the issues. Because he can't, Emein Kemech Ein Torah. If you can't deal with the challenges of physicality, you've lost. Yosef could deal with all those challenges of physicality. As Yaakov was the patriarch of Golus, identically Yosef was the equivalent of the patriarch of Golus. Because who provided for the Golus Mitzrayim, for the Egyptian exile? That was Yosef providing for that. He set things in place that we should be able to survive those 210 years. Therefore, it's Yisrael Avos Yosef ki ben Zkunim although. Because he looked like him. His facial features indicated that whatever Yaakov was in his spiritual capacity, Yosef had that plus, because in addition, besides being his son, he was the son of Rachel, who had that ability.